Whenever you're ready. We good? All right. Welcome, everybody. Glad everybody's back here today. We're getting close to the end of our discussion about angels. We are within spitting distance of the end here. And so we're going to finish up the jobs of angels, the activities of angels, the things that they do. We're going to try to get through that. And then next week, we're going to try to cover as many of those special topics in angels as we can. And so that's going to be getting close to the end here, and that's how we're going to finish this discussion up. Now, today we're going to cover the last two of our topics about what angels do, which we'll spend a little bit of time talking about things that they do, they have done, and they are continuing to do today. So we're going to cover that. And then I'll give you just a hint. Next week, I'm probably going to cover guardian angels. I'll probably cover the angel of the Lord. I thought maybe there's one other one I was going to cover, but there's just some special topics we're going to cover as we kind of finish this section out. Okay, so that's the plan. So hopefully that's kind of in line with what you guys are hoping to see. We are very near the end of this. I actually have a number of other sections which we aren't going to be covering, and I'm going to put all those up on my drive. I gave everybody a link before, and if you're still interested in the link, just email me or talk to me, and I'll send it to you. But you can at least see the slides that we aren't covering. There's only 2 or 3 other sections that I'm not going to get to cover in this discussion as we get through it. But and we'll probably cover some of the other topics pretty quickly, like Angel of the Lord. You can spend multiple classes on Angel of the Lord, but we'll probably only just kind of zoom in on why we think the angel of the Lord is who we think it is, and let you kind of take that away with you. And so that's going to be the plan. Okay, so that's where we're heading. So hopefully you can see that's where we'll be next week, and that's what we're going to try to finish up this week as we kind of continue through. If you remember from last week, we started talking about the jobs of angels, and we really covered 2 of the 4. We covered angels worship God continually. That's one of the things that we did, and we showed you a number of verses showing you where angels are worshiping God, and that was one of the jobs that angels do. Probably not one that we see because it's a spiritual realm kind of job that they do, but we know that they do it because of things we're told in the Scriptures. Now, the second thing that we talked about was that angels reveal God's will to people and basically carry out His work on this earth. And so we looked at that in a couple different ways. We looked at this whole idea of messenger, which is what the word angel means. We covered that a little bit, and we talked a little bit about how they've been messengers historically over time. And, you can probably think of some of the key events in history that had angelic messengers that came and were part of that process. And so we talked about that. And then we also fit in that little bit about carry out God's will. That's kind of a generic one. If you actually look at the last 2, they are also carrying out God's will, if you will. But these are more specifically some things that angels are involved in. Okay, so today we are going to cover they fight against God's enemies and they minister to God's people. And so those are going to be the 2 things we really talk about. Now, I'm going to tell you, these all blur. The lines between each of these 4 points kind of blur together pretty heavily. Because if you think about this, who are God's enemies? Well, I mean, you think, are God's enemies necessarily people on earth? Well, they can be. They can be working against God. But God's enemies are generally spiritual enemies, right? They're in the spiritual realm. Satan and his angels are primarily God's enemies. And so when you stop and you think about fighting against those enemies and also ministering to God's people, those 2 ideas are inherently linked together, right? Because angels are going to minister to God's people to help them fight against God's enemies of Satan and his angels, right? And so you can see all these concepts are very closely interrelated. And so you'll kind of see that as we kind of go through here. All right, so why don't we, without wasting any more time, let's go ahead and jump into this. Angels fight against God's enemies. It's actually kind of funny to me, and that's the third thing we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about Satan, what his position is, and where he came from, and all that. So we'll talk about that next week as well. But if you really stop and you think about Satan's choice, it's really kind of a foolish choice to fight against God, right? To fight against the Creator, to fight against He who made you, because of your own pride. Well, I just gave you the heads up of where we're getting, right? But to fight against that, all that seems kind of foolish to me. But that was what Satan chose to do. And so, but now we're going to talk specifically about how angels are involved in this process. So right off the bat, we're going to see that angels are very closely related to Satan and controlling Satan. Is what Satan, you'll find out, is an angel, and he is actually being bound and controlled by God's angels. In Revelation chapter 20, then I saw an angel coming down from heaven, having the keys to the bottomless pit, think hell, and a great chain in his hand, and he laid hold of the dragon, think Satan, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he cast him into a bottomless pit and shut him up and set a seal on him so that he should deceive the nations no more till the 1,000 years was finished. But after these things must be released for a little while. All right, now I'm just going to tell you right off the bat, I'm not getting into eschatology. That's not what I'm going to do here. That's another whole huge discussion which is beyond the scope of this. The point I want to get from this is angels are actively involved in the control of Satan. Angels are involved in that process. And so angels are God's ministers, God's powerful ministers, and they are involved in controlling Satan, is one of the things you're going to find out. You know, it's kind of funny because we only have a handful of named angels, right? Satan, Gabriel, Michael. Am I missing any? I think that might be them all, right? And so when you stop and you think about these powerful named angels, they're always the ones that are, you can see God is using Michael and Gabriel to do certain things, and Satan is fighting against that. But this whole process of this spiritual battle, which we'll get to at the very end, is part of what angels are going to be involved in. If you actually read Revelation, which I'm sure all of you have, Revelation has the word angel in it many, many times, like over 50 times it uses the word angel. And that makes a lot of sense. We're in Revelation, which was the revelation, on the Isle of Patmos, you know the song, right? And so this was given to us as a peek into heaven, into the spiritual realm, right? And so understandably, we're going to see a lot of angelic spiritual creatures in this peek into heaven. And that's why probably it's talked about so much in the book of Revelation. Let me see here. So if you actually read Revelation 9, chapter 1, I'll read it for you here. And I'm supposed to slow down. Revelation 9, chapter 1. I need to give people time, Darlene told me. And she's right, I do. Then the fifth angel sounded, and I saw a star from heaven which had fallen to the earth, and the key to the shaft of the abyss was given to him. All right, that seems really arbitrary. It does say angel in there, but what I want you to understand there is notice that this key was given to him. This key was for this abyss. It's the key to the abyss that we're going to find out. And again, that's all part of this binding and controlling of Satan, was part of what angels are going to do. Now, let me say this. Is it a real key? Is it a real pit? Is it a real dragon? Probably not. These are probably very figurative, trying to help us, in very human terms, understand something spiritual, which we probably never will truly understand, right? I mean, it's hard for us to get that. But this is these symbols and these images were given to us to help us kind of understand what was going on. But what I think you can take away without any concern is God's angels fight against Satan and his angels. That's what you need to understand, okay? All right, so let's see what else we've got here. Okay, and so we're going to continue with this concept. The abyss is the dwelling place of evil spirits. And so if you actually read there in, let's read there in Luke chapter 8. And they begged him that he would not condemn them to go into the abyss. You can read the whole context around that, but it's just the idea of these spiritual creatures not wanting to go into the abyss. Obviously, people do not want to be condemned to this, even though that clearly seems to be their lot that's going to happen to them. But just some things to keep in mind here, that these demons, these angels, did not want to go into this. This was against their will. They were fighting against this. And so their angels are represented as being the protectors of the saints. Here, let me make sure I get that whole concept, that point before I go any further. So let's go and talk about this. All right, so as we see the angels are not wanting to go in the abyss, but they are fighting against God's God's will, we can now see here as we think about Christians and about people that are going to be in the spiritual warfare and about how God will step in for us. And that's going to be the whole last point as well. But angels are represented as being protectors of the saints, for he shall give his angels charge over you to keep you in all your ways. In their hand they shall bear you up, lest you dash your foot against a stone. Psalm 91. All right, now, before we go here any further, let's see what this is saying. This is a passage talking about angels protecting us, right? Angels helping us. But I want us to make a point before we get off of this, because this is the real point I want to make here. This passage was quoted in another part of the Scripture. Do y'all remember where this passage was quoted? It was where Christ was in the wilderness being tempted, remember? And Satan came up to him, and Satan quoted this passage to him. I don't know if you remember that, right? But I want you. But the key thing here, though, is to keep in mind is this thing that says they shall. Let me see. Where's that? They shall bear you up. Hang on here. I'm sorry. I'm losing my points here. I'm sorry here. I am totally lost my train of thought. Sorry, sweetie. So Jesus was at the pinnacle of the temple. This is when Satan read this to him. But he took this verse out of context. He did not quote the full passage from Psalm 91. And do I have Psalm 91 here? I don't think I do. But let me go ahead and tell you what in Psalm 91, there's an added passage that says, to keep you in your ways. I'm sorry. I really got myself confused there. But this passage in the Psalms, which is what he was quoting before he ran over here to when Satan was quoting it, Satan actually left out part of this passage. Okay? And the part that he left out was to keep you in your ways, is this idea of God's going to protect you using his angels, but he does that for a purpose. Now I'm back on track. He does that for a purpose, and that purpose is to keep us in our ways. God's protection of his angels, with his angels, are for a very specific purpose, and that is to help us. That is to keep us in our ways, which is, interestingly enough, what Satan failed to mention when he quoted this passage, right? Satan mentions this passage, and his whole point was, the angels are going to protect you, should jump off this pinnacle. But the reality is God put this passage in here all around the idea of trying to help us with our spiritual walk in order to help us fight against Satan. And that was exactly what Satan wanted to hide from God. So anyway, that was a whole long discussion, and I'm sorry, and I got myself totally off base there. But the point I wanted to make here is angels are actually protecting us, but they have a reason why they're protecting us. The reason they protect us is to help us continue to follow God, is to follow in his ways, is the help we're going to get from angels in this spiritual battle that we're going to be fighting. All right. Okay. Let's see here. Here's another example of how angels fight against enemies. I sought the Lord, and he heard me and delivered me from all my fears. And I looked to him, and they were radiant, and their faces were not ashamed. This poor man cried out, and the Lord heard him and saved him out of all his trouble. The angel of the Lord encamps around all those who fear him and deliver him. I could have probably cut out that whole first part, couldn't I have? Just left the underlined part. The angel of the Lord encamps around those who fear him and deliver him. Right? And so, again, we have this idea of almost a militaristic kind of thing, this idea of a camp and surrounding and protecting us, right? And that's what these angels do. They are involved in this process by which we are supported and protected by these angels in our spiritual fight against Satan and his angels. All right? Maybe just some operative words there are, notice it's who is it that these people protect? Who is it these encamp around? It's those who fear him. And I think those are important points here. And we're kind of driving to this idea of God's angels protect his people, right? God's angels protect those who fear him. And that's maybe some of the stuff we can see here. All right. angels fight against God's enemies some more. A key role the angels play, that's kind of God's warriors, okay? Angels fight against his enemies, and we can see that in a lot of different places. One obvious example is, think about the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah. So you remember that, right? You remember the 50, 45, 40, 35, that whole bargaining that went on, right? And you remember what was happening. These angels came into Sodom and Gomorrah. They came into the gates, right? And then you remember the whole thing that went around those. Lot took them into their house, and there was guys coming to try to knock down the door to get him, and all that stuff that was happening. But here's some things that I think are important. Angels tried to save Lot, first from the mob, right? That was where he first, because remember what happened when he saved him from the mob? They were at the door, and they were trying to break their way in, and what did the angels do? They blinded them. And I think that's a really important point here. And so, so first of all, in Genesis 19, it says, when the morning dawned, the angels urged Lot, saying, take up your wife and your 2 daughters and who are here, or you will be swept away with the punishment of the city. It's this idea of warning, of trying to get Lot out of there, protecting him physically in this case, trying to protect him from the destruction was coming. If you actually look elsewhere in 19 there, but the men reached out with their hands and brought Lot into the house with them and shut the door. And then they struck the men who were at the doorway of the house with blindness from the small to the great, so that they became weary of trying to find the door. It's interesting. I actually looked this up. Let me see here. Where is that? That word that actually is used there, that blindness, actually almost means confusion. It's like that you can't see, you're unable to see things and understand things, right? And the only other place that was used was back with Elisha, when the king of Syria was coming up to Jerusalem and Elisha confused them. And that was the same word that was happening there in 2 Kings. But those are the only 2 places where we really see that same word being used, this idea of blindness or confusion that was brought on to these people. And so again, it was both, in both cases, it was miraculous, it was powerful, that was used to carry out God's will. But you see the angels, this is probably low-level stuff for angels, right? You learn this in Angel 101, right? It's where you probably learn these kind of things. But so anyway, so we see these angels were involved in all that. And so here angels are clearly involved with stopping these men from doing things that the angels didn't want them to, and with protecting Lot and his family to get them out of Dodge while they still can, right, in order to save them from this destruction that was coming. And so there you see, eventually the cities were completely destroyed, but Lot and most of his family made it out, right? Wife didn't. She turned back and looked and had some problems. And so, all right, okay, angels, oh yeah, jump in.
Yeah. So Mike, just a question. So the blindness and confusion. The blindness and confusion part, does that seem to align with angels also being able to distort perception in other places where, they're angels, but they give the appearance of being regular folks?
So obviously, and I totally agree. This idea of angels being able to hide their identity and also be able to manipulate people's minds, at least in this case, seems to be clearly part of what they can do. And they use that when necessary to do certain things. I mean, we have a number of passages we can go to look at that exact thing. The most obvious one is we can entertain angels unaware, is clearly something that the Bible tells us can happen, and I'm convinced can still happen. We can still entertain angels unaware. And those are obviously where we see these angels, but we can't distinguish them from normal people. But that's always been the case with angels, right? Angels always have appeared to be men, appeared to be just like you and me, right? And so many times we could not distinguish them. Only when the angel or God chooses to allow those angels to be looking special, the tomb, or when they're coming and saying, you're in trouble, right? Then people get it. Wait a second, I need to do something, right? But only in those cases do they take on these appearances of uniqueness or special appearances. But absolutely, I think the appearance of angels is peppered through the scriptures with that. Even Balaam and Balak, king, right? So Balaam was the person, right? And so Balaam was even, he couldn't even see him until, the donkey could see him, right? But he couldn't see him. And it's again this idea of what do the angels choose, or what does God choose to let you see? And that's clearly part of what's happening.
Yeah, and it's interesting to me that not only does God use angels to muddy vision, but he also uses them to clarify our vision if that's what's needed.
Absolutely. You look at Elisha's servant, who was, shaking, quivering, and saying, "Oh my goodness, we're all going to be killed." And Elisha said, "God, please let this guy see what's really happening." And he looks and he sees this huge host of angels that are protecting Elisha. I'm pretty sure it's Shah, right? Yeah. And so, again, there are lots of cases like that where these kind of things are hidden from us. The reality is that if you read the scriptures and you read the number of angels there are, it seems like angels are all around, right? And most of the time they are hidden from us, that we can't see them. And they're doing their jobs. They're out there working and doing their jobs without us actually being aware of what they actually are doing around us. Okay. So let's look at some other just passages here. This one to me is I still struggle with this. Jesus at the cross, being tortured, for lack of a better word, being crucified, being made fun of, jeered, ridiculed. Jesus calmly takes that because he knows why he has to take it. For the salvation of mankind, he has to put up with this. But his point was, do you not get it? If I wanted to, I could bring in 10 legions of angels, right? And that would have really made sense to them because they knew legions really well. Legion, this was Rome time. Legion was the power in the world. That was like the MX missile or whatever the current missiles are. That was from my generation. But it's the power of the day, right? And so to think that was somehow weak, that was not. God or Christ could have called these angels like he's talked about there in the Garden of Gethsemane, but he chose not to. Not because he couldn't, not because he maybe even didn't want it, because he didn't want to go through this. You just read what happened to him in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he wanted a different way to go through this, but he knew he had to, right? And so again, here's where God could have used these angels if he had chose. Well, I'm thankful this didn't happen. I don't know about you. That this is what our hope is based in, this whole idea of God choosing not to exercise his power, but instead to become the scapegoat for us. Now, other people maybe haven't been so lucky. God sent his angels to punish Herod Agrippa. Do you remember when he was feeling a little too big for his boots? And immediately the angel of the Lord struck him because he did not give glory to God and was eaten by worms and died, right? That's an unfortunate way, purely because he did not do what God said. But that was done by the angels, so clearly that can happen. Which king was it? There was another king in the Old Testament who was an animal for like a year or two. Nebuchadnezzar, thank you. I couldn't get it out of my head. I knew it was one, but even him, right? We can see God is powerful to do these kind of things if he so chooses. And in that case, it was the same thing. Pride seems to motivate people to do so many negative things, even Satan. God sent his angels to humble not only human foes, but demonic ones as well. When one angel had trouble getting God's answer to a prayer, Daniel's other angel, Michael, was sent to Satan's demons and was defeated. You can read that little story there in Daniel 10. It also goes into 13, and there's even a little bit more about it in 20. Those are those really interesting parts of Daniel. Some of them are hard to understand, I'm going to be honest, especially in that part of Daniel. But you can read about that too. And so God's angels are used for many different things, not only to do things with earthly things, but also with spiritual things. God's angels are used to fight against those enemies and to make those kind of things happen. Okay. Oh, I didn't bring my phone. What time? 9:25. Okay, and the one final thing, I think this is the final one, is part of warfare is angels actually do wage warfare. And this is some serious warfare. This is not this petty stuff we do, right? This is real warfare that we're talking about. Michael fought against Satan in Revelation chapter 12. We see him involved in that battle between Satan. You remember what happens there? Satan loses, right? He's bound. You can go and read Revelation 12, 13, and 17 tells you more about this. But instead of, he then came to earth and tried to then start to mess with us, right? That's what he's decided to do as his revenge. Now this, though, is a new type of warfare we're talking about. This is the spiritual warfare that now we're involved in, which my contention is more important than any kind of physical warfare we deal with here on earth. It's got much more ramifications, much more significant ramifications than the kind of warfare we have around us. But in Ephesians chapter 6, you can see that summary kind of passage, and I know we've read this a lot, but I'll read it again. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, what we're used to, right? But against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places. Now, here's the thing. That sounds pretty difficult to overcome, doesn't it? That sounds impossible for us to overcome. Can we overcome, powers, forces in this darkness, spiritual forces of wickedness? Is that something we can overcome? Well, the answer is yes, we can, but not because of us, but because of who's on our side, right? And that's really the point I want to leave as we leave this idea of God fights against angels' enemies. Here's the dirty secret. God's already won, right? It's over. The battle's finished, and we still get to choose sides, right? And we can still choose the winning side or the losing side. And that's what's so incredible about this whole idea that God has told us, is that the spiritual battle between Satan and God is over. Satan is the loser. God is the winner. That's done. But we now can choose to be on the side with God of the winning side, or we can choose to go over here with the rest of the losers and be with them. And that seems to me it seems crazy that we make any other choice other than the choice that we have already made, which is to be on the winning side, right? And so, anyway, it's not because of us, but it's because of God. It's because of His power. It's because of His power manipulated through His angels that allows us to do the things that we can do and fight against these spiritual warfares that we're talking about. Okay. Angels fight against God's enemies. Good? All right. I think we're going to kind of leave that one behind. Now, you're going to find this next one kind of, like I said, dovetails right into where we were. But angels minister to God's people. And here, I'm going to be honest, I always save this for last because this is the one that I like the best. And it's the one that makes me happiest, right, is that God is using His angels to help me. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. Okay. Obviously, he ministers to God's saints. And let's prove that to you. In Hebrews chapter 1, are they not all ministering spirits, talking about angels, sent forth to minister to those who will inherit salvation? Okay, think about that. Talking about angels. Okay, first of all, what is Hebrews chapter 1 all about? You guys remember? What's the outline of Hebrews? Do you remember? What's chapter 1? It is Christ is better than angels, right? And then we go, Christ is better than all these other things. That's what the rest of Hebrews is all about, right? But chapter 1 is, you're going to see we pull a bunch of passages from chapter 1. Because chapter 1 is this whole description about why Christ is so much better than angels. And his point here he's making is that angels are nothing but ministering spirits for us. That's their job. And so Christ is so much better than that because He's the one who came and gives us salvation. He's the one who, through His actions, have given us this idea of forgiveness, this idea of justification have all come through Christ. And so, of course, He is so much better than angels, right? That's what the Hebrews writer is trying to say there. But here we see, talking about angels, are they not just ministering spirits sent to help us? And the answer is yes. It's rhetorical, right? Of course they are just ministering spirits to help us, right? And so that's really what this passage is all about.
Mike, don't we need help today?
Absolutely.
Looking at this country and what is going on, well, I pray, a lot of times I'll pray during the day, Lord, we need some help.
Well, you make a really good point, and this is something I'll be honest. I fight against all the time. Is that how many times do you see something and you're like, God, I got this one. I'll take care of it. I'm okay. But when something gets really desperate, we're like, oh, God, I need your help. But the reality is I need to be all the time saying, God, I need your help. I need your guidance, right? Because the reality is what you just talked about is we are powerless to stop these forces by ourselves. Our poor abilities have no power. The best speaker, the best, strongest man, the smartest man, whatever you want to say, never is going to be able to fight against these forces that we're talking about. It's only through God that we can. And so, yes, we need that help. We need it desperately every single day. And so, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I love that point. So, how do angels accomplish this ministering? And I'm going to tell you, I don't know. I don't know how they do it. We're not told. It's part of providence, but it's also very miraculous in nature in some cases, right? And so this idea that how they do it, I don't know how they do it. It's the reality of it is. I've never seen into that look of the spiritual realm to understand, are they actually helping me remember all this? Well, I wish they'd helped me about 10 minutes ago, right? Well, they did. but are they helping me? Well, yeah, hopefully, right? Are they, I don't know, are they protecting me from harm? Possibly. It's funny to me, I've had so many things in my life that as you take a step back and you see the whole picture around it, you're like, wow, God was involved in that. How could he not be, right? And so many times as I've seen those kind of things when I've been in trouble and found out that people were praying for me right at that exact minute, and you somehow find a way out of those troubles, those are amazing things that encourage your faith, I think, but we should not be surprised by that. God takes care of his own. That's the rule, right? That's how it happens. God takes care of his people. And he does it with angels. I don't know. Do they have swords or machine guns or do they have magic wands? I don't know how they do it, but I know they do it. Okay? So I wish I could tell you a better answer than that, but that's kind of where it's at. Bless the Lord, all his host, you ministers of his who do his pleasure. Psalm. Again, you're going to find this idea of minister mixed in with angels all the time. This idea that they minister to us, that they protect us, that they take care of us is going to be linked in with this concept of angels. That's Psalms 103. And he was there in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with wild beasts, and the angels ministered to him. That's talking about Jesus, right? That's talking about his being ministered to by the angels. Here, let me catch up to the right page here. Oh man, I'm a couple pages behind. How did that happen? Okay, here we go. God's people. I got to make sure I'm on the right page. Okay, here we go. Okay, and then finally, who makes his angels spirits, his ministers, a flaming fire? Psalm 104 again. Again, angels, ministers, they're almost synonymous. Those words come together, right? I mean, it's a messenger, but linked with ministry, right? It's these powerful creatures who can do these kind of things and take care of his people as we go along. So angels minister to God's people. There's just more passages. God sent his angel to minister to Elijah. We maybe remember this story while he hid in the wilderness. Remember the story? Killing all the priests of Baal, right? I mean, I forget, 350, 400, I forget how many there were. 350, thank you. And so he was there and he got them all killed. Remember the two altars were there and all that was going on, right? All that stuff was going on. But as soon as that happened, after that mountaintop moment, literally, right? It was a mountaintop. But after that mountaintop moment, Jezebel goes crazy. I'm going to kill him. I'm going to get him, right? And so immediately he goes into hiding, right? And so it's really sad to see that he went from this amazing moment where God was glorified to this moment where he feels afraid of his life and is hiding in a cave, right? And so here we go. We can pick up the story there, 1 Kings. And then he lay and slept under a broom tree, and suddenly an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." And then he looked, and there was by his head a cake baked on coals and a jar of water. So he ate and drank and laid down again. And the angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, "Arise and eat, because the journey is too great for you." So he rose, ate and drank, and went on the strength of that food for 40 days and 40 nights as far as Horeb, the mountain of God. All right. Anyway, this is not a discussion about what kind of food that was. That was pretty powerful stuff, whatever it was. Anyway, he was getting, the angel provided it, right? Whatever he got was powerful stuff, and angels used this to help him so he could be strengthened. And there's a perfect example of how God does that. Now, I want you to understand, though, that this is not always just physical ways that these angels help us, right? There's also other ways. Think about Christ in the garden, Luke chapter 22. Do you remember as he prayed, who came to comfort him? It wasn't his apostles, they were asleep, right? It was the angels who came and comforted him before this amazing thing he was going to have to go through and endure. But they also, I think, provide emotional support. When Paul was on trial in Rome, Acts 27, I think I might have that one written down here, do I? Maybe not. I'm sorry. I didn't have that written down. But if you go and read Acts chapter 27, it talks about where Paul was strengthened as well before his trial in Rome. And so you can see both those cases were examples of when angels not only provide physical help, but they do provide emotional support as well, as we kind of go through that stuff. Okay. And then, of course, we all love this story. Kids love it too. Daniel was protected by angels from the mouth of lions, right? You remember this is after this verse is after everything happened here. But the angels actually protected. Darius was not wanting to throw him in here, but those dirty scribes or whatever, those dirty friends of his, tricked him into getting him in here, right? And so Daniel was in the lion's den. The lions' mouths were closed by the angels. Don't know how that happened, but they were closed by the angels. And Daniel, when he's down in here, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angels and shut the lion's mouth, so they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you." And so we see the example here of this just protection going on. Now the protection didn't last very long, right? As soon as he got out of there, some other people got in, and they were obviously more tasty than Daniel. So and so we saw that happen too. Okay. All right. God also used his angels protect his apostles. That was another in Acts. There, you remember, the Jewish authority imprisoned all the apostles, right? And you remember what happened at night there in Acts chapter 5? The angel came and let them in or let them out, but at night the angel appeared, and the angel of the Lord appeared and opened the prison doors and brought them out. And remember, they came back out, and the very next day, where were they? Right back in the synagogue preaching, because when the Jewish authorities went to bring them out of prison so they could yell at them, right? They were like, "They're not here." Well, where are they? Well, they're back in the temple preaching, right? And so that was all happening as part of this with the angels involved in that process as well. Okay. Okay, now I don't know why I did this, but I put first, and then I put second, and then I put fourth. I don't know how I have my flow like that. That sounds like something I would do. Okay, Peter was guarded in prison by these 16 soldiers. So if you remember, Herod Agrippa had just ordered the execution of James. That had just happened, right? And no, he wanted to please the people, so he arrested Peter here, right? So Peter was in jail. You remember that? And so he was actually bound, and there were 16 soldiers around him. He was back in the jail cells. All the doors were closed, and things were not looking good for Peter, right? And so that was where we pick up the story. Now, if you also remember in Acts chapter 12, the church was involved in this, and they were praying, right? They were in constant prayer for Peter this entire time, praying and praying and praying. You remember Rhoda was there too. She was the one who had trouble believing it was really Peter when he showed up at the door, right? But remember that whole story, right? And so Peter, everybody's praying. He was in prison, and then this angel shows up, right? And basically brings him out. He opens the doors, door after door after door. You can imagine, like one of these security max prisons, all the doors opening up as he walks through. Nobody noticing he's leaving. The soldiers he was bound to just didn't notice. They were the fetters or shackles just fell away, and he got up and walked out. Again, using the power of this angel. And the angel left him as soon as he got out of the prison, right? And so here we go. And when Herod was about to bring him out that night, Peter was sleeping, bound with 2 chains between 2 soldiers, and the guards on the door were keeping the prison. Now behold, the angel of the Lord stood by him, and the light shone in the prison, and struck Peter on the side and raised him up. And said, I guess he was a deep sleeper. And so he said, "Arise quickly." And the chains fell off, and the angel said to him, "Get yourself and tie on your sandals." And so he did. And you'll notice it continues on. And so he said to him, "Put on your garment and follow me." So he went out and followed him, and did not know what was done by the angel was real, but thought it was a vision. And when they were past the first and the second guard post, they came to the iron gate that led to the city, which opened of its own accord. And they went out and went down one street, and immediately the angel departed from him. And so he heads over to the house where everybody else is praying and ready for him. So again, powerful stuff, right? I mean, this is Mission Impossible to the top level, right? And so this is what, and so we see all this happening here with angels. So chains were seemingly opened. Guards didn't know what was happening, and they walked right past the main gates. And so again, pretty amazing stuff these angels did. to minister to his people. Okay. And then I think we're getting close to the end here. Angels strengthen us during periods of trial. He strengthened Jesus in the garden. Oh, no, he strengthened Jesus during the temptation in the wilderness. That was Matthew 4. Right before the crucifixion, Luke 22, that was in the Garden of Gethsemane. Those are cases where Jesus was strengthened. Angels also led sinners to those who needed to be preached to. That's interesting, isn't it? How angels are involved in that. Cornelius was to send for Peter, so there was an example of the angels be involved with sending for somebody to preach. And then the angel sent Philip to the Gaza Road to the Ethiopian eunuch to preach to him, right? And run, go get him. And so he ran and got on there, right? And so, again, it's interesting that that the angels are involved in that. They're not only just involved in helping us with problems we face, but also putting us into situations where we can do good for God. I love this, though, but this is a really interesting point. If you notice, angels never preach. They never preach the gospel. That's not what they're involved in. That's not their job. Their jobs are other things, but they put people in the right position so they can preach the gospel. And that's, I think, interesting. If you look at the history of angels, they cause things to happen to allow people to preach the gospel when needed. And there's two examples with Cornelius and with Philip as well. Just an interesting little side bit there. Okay, we're almost out of time. I'm going to zip through this, and I think I'm almost done here. They involved in leaving our spirit after we die. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Lazarus was an example in Luke 16. We don't know exactly how angels are involved in this, but here's what you need to know. At our death, I guess we don't have multiple ones, but at our death, angels are involved in that process of helping us through that point in our lives. Again, I don't know how it's done, but I know that that's what God has promised us. They bring answer to prayer. Gabriel to Daniel, angels to Cornelius. They're also present in the church. Paul instructs Timothy to keep his instructions in the church activities in the sight of the elect angels. So the reality is angels are around us all the time. They're here, they're involved, they're active, and they're helping us every day. And so that's really the point I want to make here as we finish up, all right? Okay, here's what we're going to talk about next week. We're going to talk about these three topics: the fall of Satan, guardian angels, and the angel of the Lord. That's the three things we're going to cover. So hopefully this will be interesting. Those are usually the ones people find exciting and fascinating when we study this anyway. So we're going to talk about those three things next week, and that will be our last class in angels. So thanks for your attention. We're really out of time here. So, oh yeah, we're done, right? And so I'll see you next week, and then we'll hopefully finish this out. Again, if you want to get any of these slides, I've got them on. I've been putting up on the web drive that you can actually pull them down if you want them. Thanks a lot.